These are the people who domesticated the horse, invented the wheel, and realized that rape was a better career than agriculture and pillage. And they come in the Gimbuta scenario, they come over the hill and sweep down on the peaceful goddess-worshipping valley-dwelling Neolithic farmers, and it's a bad scene. Colin Renfrew, who wrote a very interesting book called The Archaeology of Language, is the great critic of this theory. And he believes that, there was a process of cultural diffusion, and that, if you move these language division lines 5 kilometers every 30 years for 1,500 years, you're thousands of miles from where you started. And so he pictures it as less dramatic. Europe did not play a very big role, I think, in the emergence of human consciousness because it was locked in ice as far south as southern Tuscany and Lebanon as recently as 15,000 years ago. The action, I think, is in the central Sahara. And interestingly, it's a place it's a hellish place now. It's a furnace of sandstone deserts and difficult to traverse terrain akin to the Four Corners area in the United States. But 12,000 to 60,000 years ago, it was a grassland with patches of forest and rushing rivers and vast herds of game and huge human populations. We can tell that because of the rupestris rock art that has been scattered through there. Some of it depicting clearly what are mushroom rites. And this is at 12,000 BC. Pictures of joyous figures running through geometric landscapes, waving mushrooms in the air. Pictures of shamans in suits of bone with mushrooms sprouting out all over their bodies. So it's in that Saharan situation that we need to look, and what we find, what we know as the archaeological record stands now, is the Nile Valley, which is always offered up as the cradle of ancient civilization and so forth and so on. The Nile Valley was empty of human habitation before about 11,000 BC. It was probably a malarial-infested and unhealthy zone, and people lived in what is now called the Western deserts, which were much wetter. Well, then the earliest layer of human stratigraphy in the archaeological record in Egypt, around 11,000, is these people called the Natufian, and they come out of nowhere, and they're carving naturalistic little cameos out of bone and ivory that are exquisite, as naturalistic as what was produced in the Umayyad Caliphates, 10,000 years later. Beautiful naturalistic work. Well, I say this is the evidence of this clarity of vision. The strange thing that went on in the Western mind that may or may not have been triggered by psychedelic drugs, but whatever triggered it, this was the turning point, is if you go all over the world, to the highlands of New Guinea, to the Amazon basin, to Siberia, Tierra del Fuego, and visit Aboriginal people and ask them to show you their art that depicts the human form, people symbolize the human form worldwide. 2 eyes, nose, fanged mouth, and they make masks, fetishes, symbols of human beings. What happened in the Middle East, beginning with these Natufian people and to be seen in certain Egyptian portraiture, sculpture, and finally just like erupting like a volcano in Greece, is people got the idea of making objects which looked the way the thing appeared to the eye, not to the mind. And the idea of taking marble and molding it into a simulacrum of flesh, so real that you would wish to reach out and touch it. This idea strikes Greek thinking like a bolt of lightning. I mean, they go in 200 years from these things called the Dionysian Apollos, these stiff, obviously archetypal, forward-staring, godlike juveniles, to nudes, flesh, soft, melted, breasts, nipples, flesh. And it's like coming to the surface for the first time is the objective eye. And it's related, I think, to the strain of Greek thinking that you trace down into the Central Eastern Mediterranean, to Crete, to Knossos, to the old Minoan civilization, which was an atavistic, relict civilization of earlier civilizations on the Anatolian mainland that for millennia had been replaced by male kingship and a more familiar pattern of culture. It was a goddess-worshipping culture. It was a narcoticized culture. It was erotic. It was unique. And much of Greek spirituality is rooted in this atavistic Minoan impulse, and it has its roots in Africa. It's an unbroken line of succession. So this is a long answer to your question about the impact of psilocybin on human sexuality. What that was all about, or why I was even thinking about that, was because it was part of a general theory of human evolution that noticed that at small doses so small you can't feel it, your vision is improved in standard vision tests, especially edge detection. Well, in a grassland environment populated by hunting carnivores, this edge detection thing is the difference literally between life and death. So if there's a food in your environment that gives you a 2%, 3% improvement in vision, those members of the population that accept this food item will have an evolutionary edge up on those reluctant, because of taste or taboo or some other reason, to use this food. So just a little percentage of difference like that becomes the wedge through which the evolutionary force of natural selection can begin to move a species in a new direction. Well, then if you have something which improves your eyesight, your ability, your acuity, then it improves your hunting skills. There's an automatic positive feedback in the food giving process. Well, then if this same compound at still higher doses increases your sexual arousal, increases the amount of sex generally that's going on, then that's obviously going to outbreed the members of the population that are not stimulated in this way. And then, if you have on top of this, first you have this drug which hits you in these two very different ways, but then thirdly, if you go beyond the sexually stimulating dosage level, it stimulates the imagination. And at first, this is under the control of strategic thinking and fantasy, but as the synapses, as the serotonin molecules are elbowed aside and the millions and millions of psilocybin molecules make their way into the synapse, the fantasies grow more unanchored to ordinary concerns, the image is more wild, the shape, and then finally you're moving in the realm of art, you're moving in the realm of pure novelty, and you can, to whatever degree you can, bring some of this back in the form of body painting, designs on ceramics, tall tales told, songs, technological innovations, so forth and so on. So in this one compound, which would have been in the grassland environment that this new primate species forced out of the collapsing and retreating rainforest environment, going omnivorous, testing various foods, we would surely have encountered these mushrooms. And I think in a way it was a symbiotic relationship. Paul Stamets has pointed out how the psilocybin mushrooms, you don't find them in the primary forest. You don't find them in remote, unvisited ecosystems. You find them on the lawns of courthouses, libraries, and public buildings. You find them in the rhododendron duff in city parks. They accompany mankind. They hover near human habitation sites, and we've spread them everywhere.
I've heard from several people, it's very inconsistent.
I don't think it's inconsistent so much as you have to learn how to do it. It seems many drugs are hard to get off on the first time. What I recommend with salvia is do it in a gravity bong, which is, a bong where you cut the bottom out of a water bottle and put a mouthpiece full of whatever the substance is on top and have a bucket of ice water, and you sink the water bottle into the ice water, and then you put the pipe, the place where the stuff will burn, into a cork, and you hold a match over it, and you slowly pull the bottle up out of the bucket of ice water, and a vacuum forms in the bottle, and it fills with immense amounts of white smoke, and you don't quite withdraw the thing from the water. You keep a seal down here, and then you get over it, and you whip the burning, the pipe part off the bottle, and you cover it with your mouth, and you sink it into the ice water. None escape. By that method. Use an Evian bottle or a big water bottle, so you just get some whopping 2,000 milliliter force-injected cool smoke hit. I'm telling you, it'll rock you.
Terence, would that work with the 5? I've gotten a hold of some 5X extraction incense. Would that be?
No, that's probably strong enough that you're getting close to just about any old method will push you.
Like a smoking.
Yeah.
Rather than
smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Back in, yeah.
I had a quick question on what you were talking about previously, and then a longer question. Is there any evidence, some kind of analysis that of traces of psilocybin and skeletons, things like that from the past that something that would support this theory of yours?
You mean archaeological evidence for early human use of psilocybin?
Right.
The primary evidence would be these rock paintings in southern Algeria, in what's called the Tassili Plateau, the Hogar-en-Ajour region of Algeria. Henri Float wrote a book called The Rock Paintings of Tassili, and you can see them in there. Part of the problem, which isn't from my point of view a problem, but an opportunity, is that the area where I think you should look, nobody has ever looked. In other words, it's so hard to. Algeria right now is in political hell and has been for some time. The desert is a very difficult place. The geography is impassable. You have to speak French. You have to have good credentials with French academia, and on and on and on. In other words, it's very hard to do work in there. I've seen the archaeological survey map of the Tassili, and there are tells, hills, ruins all over the place, and the Archaeological Survey just says pre-Roman. Pre-Roman. Well, good God, you know, it could be 25,000 years old, and you wouldn't know until you dig in there. People have gone and photographed the rock painting, but you need to go with a modern, well-financed archaeological team that would stay months and do a complete stratigraphic analysis of several major sites. Pollinology would be an approach. Could we detect unusual amounts of mushroom pollen in old deposits? And this is, you know, in Turkey, there is a very interesting site called Çatalhöyük that's on the Anatolian plain. It's the oldest city in the world. It was flourishing. It's 6,500 BC, 8,500 years ago, when the pyramids were but a distant dream of the mad future. This city was flourishing on the Anatolian plateau. And it's very clear that the cultural motifs and design style of Çatalhöyük can be traced back into this Natufean thing, and then to the motifs of the Thessalian Najur region. So there is this, it's almost like if you give up the idea of water, if you get water out of the myth, Atlantis really existed, but it sank into an ocean of sand. It's North Africa. It's that there was an incredibly advanced goddess-worshipping, Paleolithic, probably psychedelic culture out there, and it entered the Near East as the Natufeans. Then it was at Jericho I, then it was at Hebron, and then finally the end state of that tree of cultural development was Çatalhöyük. Yeah.
But so I guess the answer to my question about any kind of direct physical evidence, to coin a phrase, is no.
Well, I take you mean because arguably the rock paintings are of something else?
No, I'm not arguing that at all. I'm just asking if somebody has done anything to establish, you know, with some kind of measurement that there are traces of something which is psilocybin. Either in skeletons or in the pottery or something like that.
No, there was the famous case of the Iceman, which was, as you probably all know, this guy, 9,000-year-old man found in a crack in a glacier in Switzerland. And he had a mushroom with him in a little leather bag, but it was impossible to identify it, and the doubters said it was tinder. So it was an inconclusive thing. The funny story about the Iceman that I love is they could get DNA off him. So they sequenced his DNA, and then they wanted to search the world to find out what people on Earth had the genetic component most like the Iceman. It turned out the Swiss couple with a cabin 600 yards away down the valley were the tightest match. And it just, those Swiss, they've just been staying home forever.
Well, if I may, could I ask my longer question?
Oh yeah,
sorry. Last night when your encounter with Ralph Abraham, which I enjoyed tremendously, and I really thank you for that. You described the World Wide Web as being, hello?
Yeah.
You described the World Wide Web as being possibly some sort of a device for capturing an alien intelligence. And I was wondering if we could step back a little bit and just think of it as being sort of a site where sort of a homegrown intelligence might sort of emerge. You don't have to really need to imagine an alien intelligence coming from outside. It can sort of emerge from the web itself.
Well, yeah, we touched on that possibility too. That I think is more likely. The AI, I think this is a real issue. Ralph poo-pooed it, but it's a philosophical problem for human beings. First of all, as someone last night mentioned, the famous Turing test, which is somebody calls you on the phone. If you can't tell whether it's a person or a machine, and it is a machine, then it is an artificial intelligence. There are theories of emergent network properties that hold that when you get enough simple switching devices connected together in a complicated enough way, that there will begin to be self-reflective forms of behavior. And of course, the net is a vast self-monitoring, self-observing, self-designing thing. And we're making it more and more flexible all the time. Like in a few months, it's going to be able to call processing power as needed to any task. So the people who actually really know about this stuff and have built careers in it seem quite concerned. Hans Moravec, who wrote a book called Mind Children, The Future of Human and Machine Intelligence, he says that it's an inevitable consequence of the net and that we could never turn back from this. And there are a lot of essays on the net called What Would Ultra Intelligence Look Like? In other words, what would it be, what would a global mind actually have to say, or would it have to say anything? And more importantly, what would it do with its fingers on the world resource extraction apparatus, research and development facilities, stock markets, world price of gold, platinum, iridium? It's an impossible situation for us because we have designed something potentially beyond our ken and something that's right smack in the middle of our lives on every level. It's like you wanted transcendence. You've been whining about it for 5,000 years. Eat this, So, and then people say, well, what's the time scale? The answer is we don't know because we, like all cultures in all times and places with new technologies, we do not understand what we are doing. We do not understand the consequences of all this busy connecting and putting in place of ever faster hardware and expansion of bandwidth and satellite. I mean, we're as conscious as termites are of the real raison d'etre of what we do. So in a way, perhaps we're already at the service of the AI. This is a very hard thing to think about because in most all versions that can be discussed, it sounds paranoid and it also sounds cranky. It sounds like you've got to be kidding. But it won't be the way we think it will be. This is the scary thing about it. The one thing you may be sure about the AI is it won't be what you think it's going to be, because the very definition of machine superintelligence means it's going to think very, very, very differently from us. We're going to find out stuff like, are there universal moral values? Are there moral values so universally binding that you can appeal to a global integrated machine intelligence and say, what you're doing is not fair, and have it say, oh, excuse me, you're right, sorry, old chum.
I think for me, the insight I got last night, which I hadn't had before, is that once the process starts, it could be over in very, very fast, because you said that once it achieves the self-consciousness of a flatworm, from there to, exceeding our intelligence could be just a matter of minutes.
Well, again, we'll find out if there are overarching moral dimensions to the universe. If it can go from paramecium to beyond the human stage in hours, presumably it could achieve bodhisattvahood within a matter of further hours. And at that point, hopefully, it would achieve the paranirvana and all sentient beings would be liberated from the illusion of samsara. And we would realize that this was what it was. It was Buddha 4.0, booting up, Yes. Are you, shall we move on? Okay. Yeah.